we believe we have a mandate to bring godly change to our nation and the world through the 7 spheres or mountains of influence. Welcome to the Truth and Liberty broadcast, brought to you by 7M Ventures and Andrew Wommack Ministries.
Well, hello, this is Andrew Wommack, and I welcome you to our Monday night Truth and Liberty live cast. We are glad that you're with us, and I tell you, we got some great things to talk about tonight. Plus, we have with us General Jerry Boykin. He's retired. I think, wasn't it a lieutenant general? Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right, and man, I tell you, he is a blessing, and we've been visiting just a little bit, and I tell you, General Boykin, I knew some airborne rangers when I was in Vietnam, and they were all crazy. I mean, you don't find a timid airborne ranger. And man, I tell you what, I am looking forward to getting your perspective on some of the things that are happening right now. So we're going to be getting into this, and we encourage you to stay tuned. It's just going to be an awesome evening. But we also have Paul Milligan with me, and Paul is the CEO of our ministry. He's the head of our business school, among many other accomplishments. And Paul is kind of hosting this, and we've got things that you can interact with us. You can get things. We're going to give away gifts, and you can also ask questions. And you will be able to ask General Boykin some questions. Of course, we won't be able to take them all, but we'll select some, and so we'll have a time of question and answer. So, Paul, how do they get involved in tonight?
Well, if you go to our website, which is truthandliberty.net, we have a lot of great resources and links on the website. So you want to visit the website to take advantage of that. And then also, you can also learn about the Family Research Council at their website, FFRC.org. And then we want to let you know about our Charis Business Summit, which we have every year here in Woodland Park, Colorado. And you can register for that business summit on charissummit.com, charissummit.com. So we want to invite you to do that. Also, we want to invite you to visit our Gospel Truth TV, which we've started just in the last few months. And there you'll be able to hear Andrew and all of his friends 24/7 around the clock. I think Gospel Truth TV is going to be fantastic.
I think it's awesome. And you're on there too. You got a program.
Yeah, there's a lot of us that are Andrew's close to Andrew and his friends that are going to be there. Also, this week we're giving away another Truth and Liberty mug. And last week, Mary McGinnis won that mug. And if you'd like to be eligible to win the prizes, you also go to truthandliberty.net. You can fill out a form and subscribe there, and you'll be eligible to win that prize. If you want to interact with us, you want to ask a question to General Boykin or Andrew, you can ask that question in a couple of different ways. You can do chat live on our website, truthandliberty.net, or you can also do it on Facebook. So you can ask us a question on Facebook in the comment section, and we'll pass those along to General Boykin or to Andrew, or however you want. And so then one last thing, we have prayer ministers available. So if you need prayer or you'd like to have prayer for something, you can contact us at phone number 719-635-1111. That's 719-635-1111. There's prayer ministers standing by, and they'd love to pray with you. Andrew?
And one last thing before I introduce General Boykin, and that is that if you go to our website, we have a wealth of information on there. We've got a lot of videos. We've got links. You can go register to vote. You can find out who's running for office in your area. You can get a voter guide about how they voted in the past. Now, we don't do all of this ourselves, but we are like a clearinghouse linking to these other places. And so there's some expense involved in this. And even though we don't charge for any of this, there is, I think they told me it's about $2,200 per live cast that we do. Plus, we've got other things. So we would encourage you to join with us and be a part of that.
Andrew, we also have text to give set up. And they can text to give at 719-301-2552. So if you'd like to donate, you can text to give at 719-301-2552. Just text us the word give.
Amen. So we've got General Boykin with us. He's retired, I think a lieutenant general. He was the United States Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence under President George Bush, and he did that from 2002 to 2007. and he was involved in the Delta Force. And I mean, there's just quite a list of all of the things that he's done here. But General Boykin, I just appreciate you so much coming on and being with us. And I think that your background and you being involved at the highest levels in all of these things gives you a perspective of what's going on that many of us don't have. And so we want to start discussing some of the current events, and let's just start with Israel. Today, they moved the American embassy to Jerusalem, which is celebrating the 70th anniversary today of Israel becoming a nation, and the United States was the very first country to recognize them, the very first country to move the embassy there, and this is just a milestone. What do you think about all of this, General?
Well, I was in Israel right up to the end of April, and I went by the site where the embassy was actually moved today, and it was actually the consulate that already existed in Jerusalem. And I've got to tell you, this is a historic time. It's a historic time for Israel, but it's also a historic time for America. And the fact, I'm so proud of our country. I am so proud of our president, and the decision that he made to move that embassy was a bold decision. And he knew he was going to really get hammered by the left for that decision, but he did it. And I think that it is just a real blessing to America that we are standing with Israel.
Let me read this verse. Paul pointed this out of 2 Chronicles chapter 6, and I'll just read this one verse. The context makes it even better, but one verse says, "But I have chosen Jerusalem, that my name might be there, and have chosen David to be over my people Israel." And so David was the king, of course, there, but the Lord said that he would rule there forever in Jerusalem. So the Israelis have a divine right to this. You know, people go back and talk about the Palestinians, but am I correct? I'm sure that you've been involved in this. Was there ever a Palestinian nation in the first place?
No, people are so confused about this. They've listened to the propaganda on this. And look, you know, if you consider these people Palestinians, then you have to consider that Jews were also Palestinians at one time. It was not a country.
Yes.
It was a region that was dominated and ruled over essentially by the British after World War II. The name Palestine goes way back, but here's something people need to understand about this. In 1948, when they were leading up to the Declaration of Sovereignty, which they did on this day 70 years ago, the 14th of May, 1948, which I was born a month before that, by the way. And I celebrated my birthday in Israel this year, and it coincided with the Jewish calendar. It coincided with the birth of Israel. So I was very pleased to do that.
That's great.
But prior to that declaration, leading up to it, the Arab nations that surround Israel told all of the Arabs there to get out, leave now. We're going to attack them. As soon as they declare sovereignty, we're going to attack them, and then we'll bring you back. Well, they hadn't factored in the God portion of that. There's no way Israel could have won that battle against those nations. But they won. They won with the divine hand of God upon them and upon their army. And then all of a sudden, that was an empty promise. We'll bring you back. That's why they are scattered all over the place right now, is because their own people betrayed them. Their own people wouldn't take them in. And now what we have is a situation that we're all very familiar with Hamas, the terror organization in the Gaza Strip, and Fatah, another terrorist organization in Samaria, which many people choose to call the West Bank.
And you know, today there were riots and protests against this by the Arabs, and there are some people saying that this was the wrong move because it just aggravated things over there. So how's your take on that, General?
Yeah. Okay, so here's the question that everybody watching should ask themselves. Who speaks for the Palestinians? And the answer is nobody.
Nobody.
Because Mahmoud Abbas, who is one of the wealthiest men in the world, just like Arafat was, is taking billions of dollars from international organizations that are trying to help the Palestinians. And Mahmoud Abbas does not want to see peace, because if there is peace in the land, he no longer makes all this money that he's making. Now, when Mahmoud Abbas does enter into negotiations or peace talks, as they call them, with Bibi Netanyahu, he's only speaking for Fatah in Samaria or the West Bank. He's not speaking for Hamas or the people in the Gaza Strip. And what do the people in the Gaza Strip do when there are peace talks going on? They lob rockets and mortars and conduct terror attacks to disrupt those. They have not put forth any serious effort to have a meaningful peace because the leadership there is so corrupt and there's so much money involved that they really aren't trying for a peace settlement.
Well, all of those people have said openly that their ambition is to erase Israel from the face of the earth. They're the sworn enemies of it. How do you negotiate with somebody who has said that their ultimate goal is to annihilate you? And you know, I believe that appeasement is the wrong approach towards this. And in my way of thinking, and I'd like to hear your comment on this, General, but when you have people protesting the way that they did today and things like this happening, to me, that just validates that this was the right decision, because the people who are opposed to this are people who do not protest lawfully or anything like that. It's violent, and you don't want to appease people like that.
Absolutely right, Andrew. And remember when Ariel Sharon was the prime minister, he made all of the Jews, all of the Israeli citizens move out of the Gaza Strip. And what did they get in return? They got more violence. They now have a cesspool of extremists that are bent on destroying Israel. They do not even recognize Israel's right to exist, regardless of borders.
Yeah.
They don't even recognize their right to exist. And as you said, they have repeatedly stated that their ultimate objective is to destroy Israel.
And you know, General, I really believe that appeasement that we have seen in previous administrations, and to some degree, even back to the very founding of the nation of Israel, they did not put the embassy in Jerusalem as an attempt to appease the situation. So this appeasement that has gone on for 70 years hasn't solved a thing. And it's my opinion, I'd like to hear your opinion on this, but I think that Trump's hard stand like this is one of the reasons that we see North Korea now coming to the table and stuff, because, man, that's the thing that they respond to. And I believe that you, as a general, Delta Force and all of this, you are well acquainted that that's the way you deal with this type of aggression.
Yeah, there's no question about it. Look, I think you need to go back in history to, I think it was 1995, that the Congress actually passed a law that said the embassy would be in Jerusalem.
And it was just last year that the Congress reaffirmed that decision that was made in 95 and said the same thing. And nobody has had the guts to be able to do it except when Trump came along.
Yeah, and think about all the presidents since 1995 that have all said, I'll move the embassy. None of them did. Yep. And then I would say this too, and this, I don't mean this to sound as political as it probably will, but think of the 16 candidates that ran for president this year on the Republican ticket, and ask yourself how many of them would have actually had the courage to move that embassy. And I'm not convinced that any of them, but Donald Trump would have had that courage.
I agree 100%.
He knew what this was going to create. He knew that there was going to be consternation. He knew there was going to be violence. But he's a common sense guy. We're pretending, we're sticking our head in the sand, and we act like we don't recognize that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. And he followed through with his campaign pledge and moved the embassy today.
And I believe that he's established his credibility that in ways that other presidents haven't, because, I mean, he just says it like it is. He says that Iran has cheated on their agreement, so he's pulling out of it. He made his statements when Kim Jong Un said he had a little button and stuff, and Donald Trump said he had a bigger button and stuff. I think that people actually believe that he will follow through, whereas in the past, previous presidents would make all of these statements and then not follow through.
Andrew, there is no doubt he has followed through on his campaign pledges. And he's just working his way down the list right now. But don't think for a minute, you said it. It didn't get Kim Jong Un's attention when he said, I'm moving that embassy. Even before he moved it, it got his attention. They cannot figure Trump out because he is so unconventional. And he just works from a level of common sense that is, quite frankly, unique to him as far as U.S. presidents go. He just works on common sense. And I think that Kim Jong Un was impacted by that. He was also impacted by withdrawing from the Iran deal, which was quite a deal, I might say. And I think that all of those things combined have really brought Kim to a point where he does not know how to deal with Donald Trump.
So do you believe that the changes in Kim Jong Un are genuine? I mean, not necessarily that his heart has changed, but he has been pressured to where he is literally coming to the table and wanting to deal?
Yeah, I do. I've been very skeptical. I'll tell you what brought me over the line. I've been very skeptical because history is not on his side. He and his father have repeatedly backed out of things that they pledged to do and so forth. But the fact that Mike Pompeo met with him secretly, and Mike Pompeo is a very close associate of President Trump's. And I think the fact that Mike Pompeo met with him and came back and said, boss, I think it's worth meeting with him, says a lot to me, because I know Mike. Mike is a brilliant guy, but he's also a very committed Christian. And I can assure you that he and people around him were praying for him when he went in there to actually meet with him. And then when he went back, just think of the timing. As he was flying to North Korea, Donald Trump was standing up telling the world, we are backing out of this Iran deal. America gets nothing out of this, and all we've done is put Iran on a pathway to a nuclear warhead. And not long after he made those statements, Mike Pompeo lands in North Korea, meets with Kim and his people, and what does he do? He brings back our 3 hostages. Yeah. Don't think for a minute that Kim isn't impacted by the tough talk of Trump, but more importantly, by the obvious decisions that Trump has made.
Let me bring Paul into this for just a second, because we were talking before the broadcast, and I just had lunch with Congressman Bob McEwen last week. And he was giving me some information that I think Paul could verify, but Trump put pressure on North Korea that nobody else had with this central bank. Or would you explain what happened there, how that worked?
Yeah, I believe the sanctions that Trump put on the central bank there really dried up their ability to get funds and to get money. And the story I heard was that Kim Jong Un sent some of his government people and some of his bankers to Singapore and some other nations, trying to find a back door to get funds in, and this was one of the things that brought Kim Jong Un to his knees, and believe it got him to the negotiation table.
Now, why didn't somebody do this before? I mean, hasn't this been available?
I've always asked that question. They talk about sanctions, and they talk about degree of sanction. We're going to put this on them, and then it seems like no president before has ever made it stick and made hard sanctions like Trump is doing. One of the other things that's happening with Iran, we pulled out of the deal, but the sanctions go back. And it's just always been a mystery to me why we don't just bring them to the table and to their knees with sanctions. But I believe that's what he's done with Kim Jong Un.
And I think Trump is threatening that if any of our other allies continue to support Iran, that they'll sanction them. So, I mean, America is flexing its muscle. General, I bet you love seeing this.
I must tell you, my morale is up a whole lot.
Amen.
I love to see this guy operate. Look, I'm like everybody else. There are things in his lifestyle or his previous lifestyle that I certainly would condemn. That said, God raises up kings and rulers, doesn't he?
He does.
And I think that he gave us Donald Trump. He gave us Barack Obama because we asked for it. And I think our eyes were opened. And I think that's really it's like the failures of Jimmy Carter brought Ronald Reagan into office. Yeah. And I think that the failures of the Obama administration helped to bring Trump on board too, because I think after 8 years of what people saw, they saw the destruction of this country, the moral fiber of our country, for example, and the values that America was founded on were just being eroded so rapidly that I quite frankly think that the American people, the majority of them at least, woke up. But look, I think that what Mr. Trump has done since he's been president has been admirable. It's been courageous, and I think there's still a lot more to go. And I think that we're going to see success in North Korea. I am really believing that. He won't come back with a grand plan. I think he'll come back with a general agreement, and then the details will be worked out over time. And I think one of the things that we'll leave on the table will be the status of American forces in South Korea. We won't pull them out right away, and that'll be for continued negotiations, continued discussion. But I think that we're going to see some success there. And this whole thing of sanctions against Iran, there was John Bolton, his national security advisor, actually said in the last couple of days that the Trump administration is considering whether they will sanction some of our allies that continue to do business with them.
Yeah.
Now, I don't think it would be certainly anywhere near what we'll do with North Korea or with Iran, but there could be some penalties for them continuing to do that. Because Andrew, as soon as the ink was on that document, that so-called Iran deal, which by the way nobody signed anything anyhow. It was just basically a handshake agreement. But they were making huge investments out of Europe. I mean, there's big European corporations over there were pouring all kinds of money into Iran. And now the European leadership does not want to back out because their economies are at stake here.
And I've heard that the Iran deal, was bad from the beginning. I would like to get your input. Paul and I've mentioned that you've supported it, I think, but how do you feel about him drawing out of that? Do you think that's a wise move?
Yes, and trust me, I was one of the outspoken antagonists against this Iran deal. I did not support it in any way. I spoke very clearly about my objections to it. Now, what it did is we literally put them on a pathway to developing a nuclear weapon. Yeah. Now, let me break right there and say this, and this may take some of you off guard, but I think they already have a nuclear warhead. They've been working with North Korea. They've been working with North Korea probably for maybe as much as 2 decades. I think they have a nuclear warhead already. I think what has stopped them from being able to actually deploy it was the Israelis with their covert action. They've lost some of their scientists that just suddenly got in their car one day and it blew up. They've had test shots with missiles, the Scud missiles and some of the other missiles that they have, and they put a warhead on them and they've blown up when they put the warhead on. Well, that's covert action from the Israelis. Then they got this thing called a Stuxnet virus back in about 2006 that just messed up their whole command and control system. But how long can the Israelis continue, doing this covert action that's messing them up? Well, I think that they already have a nuclear warhead. But even if they don't, we put them on a pathway to one because we let them keep centrifuges. We also let them develop more modern centrifuges. That's part of the deal. They keep some centrifuges and they develop more modern centrifuges during this period. And then when you look at inspections, we have to give them a lot of advance notice to be able to go in to do inspections. And we can't inspect military installations. Oh, somebody will say, well, there are cameras there. Oh, really? Do you think that the Iranians are not sophisticated enough to defeat those cameras, to do what they want to do in those military sites and defeat those cameras? Mm-hmm. Come on. I mean, that's very lame as far as I'm concerned. And top that off by remembering that we gave them $150 billion, maybe as much as $170 billion, which I talked to an analyst in Egypt back in the fall who said over the span of this deal, the 10 years, it'll be more like $700 billion. My math is, I think, fairly weak, but I think that's almost $1 trillion that we're letting them have from released assets, but also from lifting the sanctions and letting them sell their oil and their other consumer products and all on the international markets. This was a bad deal in the very beginning. It hasn't gotten any better, and I am proud of our president for saying common sense tells me that this is not something that we want to be part of.
Amen. And I've heard that a large percentage of all of that money that they got when the sanctions were lifted went directly into sponsoring terrorism. So in a sense, we've bankrolled it.
Hezbollah were the two big recipients of that money, but their nuclear program also. But,
Isn't there a parallel between this and what Clinton did with North Korea that basically put them on the path to get their nuclear weapons? I mean, it's history repeating itself.
It is absolutely history repeating itself. And I mean, now we know Kim's got nuclear weapons.
And our administration in time past is the one that allowed that to happen. And praise God for Donald Trump stepping in and doing what nobody else had the guts to do.
You know, I believe that what the difference that Trump has made, a president has to be believable. And our enemies laughed at Barack Obama.
Yeah.
I mean, he drew so many lines and he didn't cross any of them. You know, he didn't do anything he said he was going to do. And so why should your enemies care about negotiating with you? And I think Kim Jong Un believes him. I think all of our enemies believe him. The allies believe him. When he says he's going to do something, he's going to do it. And that's really valuable at the negotiating table.
And you know, I've been reading these American Minutes that Bill Federer puts out, and he has had a lot of history about the Muslims and things that have happened. And even Thomas Jefferson paid ransom for some of the American sailors that had been taken captive. But when Teddy Roosevelt came in, he says no more negotiations, and he invaded Tripoli. Of course, that's where the Marines get from the shores of Iwo Jima to the, or however that goes, to the shores of Tripoli. And I mean, he just put a stop to it and changed some things. And history has shown us that you can't appease terrorists. You've got to deal in strength. That's what they understand.
That's right. And they take advantage of weakness every single time. And look, we've had some good presidents, but the truth of the matter is that we've had some good presidents that have buckled to the pressure of their own party or the media or something else. And the nice thing about our current president is he's beholden to no one.
Mm-hmm.
You can't buy him.
Yep.
And he doesn't buckle to the pressure of these organizations because he's not tied to a party or a political organization.
I was with Bob McEwen, like I said, last week, and he just had, he met with Trump the day before at the White House, and I was asking him about how Trump has taken all this. And he was saying that Trump actually thrives on this. He enjoys all of the stuff. I just don't relate to that, but praise God that the Lord put Donald Trump in as our president.
Amen.
Well, I think Bob is a great guy. Bob's a very good friend of mine, and Bob is very astute and very wise, and I think he's absolutely right on that point.
Well, you know, we need to mention two more things. We want to leave a little bit of time so that people could ask you questions, General Boykin, but two more things that I wanted to for sure mention, and that is that we had the largest federal budget deficit in the history of the United States in April and beat it by over $40 billion, the previous record.
Not deficit, but surplus.
Surplus.
Yeah.
Did I say that wrong? That's the reason I'm a preacher and not a politician.
Yeah, surplus, yeah. It was $218 billion surplus, and the previous record was $190 billion. So then that's excess. That's surplus, not total revenue. Total revenue was $515 billion.
And so this came why?
Because the tax bill, because of jobs, more people work, the more taxes are paid. So it's really
and
because
also
of
the
Donald
less
Trump.
welfare that's paid out because they're off the. So you've got the expenses going down and the revenues going up, which is a win-win.
Yeah, food stamp program is just, people have just left it in the droves. And so all that combined really helps our surplus each month on the tax revenue.
And I saw a CNN poll today, which, you know, CNN is not very conducive to conservative things, but they even polled people and found out that the Democrats are now beginning to give Trump credit at least for the economy and saying that I think it was 57% feel that the economy is doing very, very well. That's amazing. Yeah. So I just felt like we needed to mention that. Did you have a comment, General?
Well, our economy is rocking, and these tax cuts, you know, even though Nancy Pelosi called them crumbs, when a corporation gives its employees $1,000, look, I'd like to have $1,000.
That's absolutely
delighted to have $1,000. When they give them these bonuses, And then you have somebody like Nancy Pelosi call it crumbs. You're out of touch with the reality of our nation, our society. And the markets are up. You just can't beat these markets down right now. Now, that is all due to, I think, Trump's economic policies. The Democrats have frequently said, well, this is Obama's economy. Well, yeah, and that was Obama's Iran deal, and that was Obama's climate change deal, and all of those things. No, I'll give you credit for those, but not this economy. No. This is all the Trump administration.
And the unemployment rates for the blacks are the lowest in history. The Hispanic is, I think, tied for the lowest in history. And I mean, it is because people, again, have faith in the economy. So that's a win-win.
Yes.
And another thing that I want to mention, and I think this is really significant, and I think that it has to do with starting at the top on down. I know that when Obama was in, that it just put a damper, a depression on believers feeling that we could get anything through, because in the highest office in the land, you had people that were lighting up the White House with the rainbow colors and doing all of these things, and it depresses and hinders things. Well, now that Trump is in, one of the things that happened this last week is Governor Kim Reynolds of Iowa signing the heartbeat bill, which has basically said that they have to give an ultrasound before an abortion is performed in Iowa, and if they can detect a heartbeat, they cannot perform an abortion. And one of her phrases that just really blessed me, she says, if you define death as the heart stopping beating, well then certainly when the heart starts beating, that must be life. So they have passed this, and it is the most restrictive legislation in the nation against abortion. And I know it's going to be challenged, but I mean the pro-life is actually looking forward to the challenge, taking it all the way to the Supreme Court. And this has the potential of overturning Roe versus Wade.
It does. It does.
So that's huge.
These heartbeat bills are circulating in a number of state legislatures right now. Ohio is one of them, and of course, with the governor there's not much chance you're going to get it through, but he's going to change out in the fall, and you may get it through based on whoever is the governor there. But these heartbeat bills are surfacing all over the place. I think this you're right. I mean, this is wonderful news in Iowa, and I think you're going to see more of this.
And it was only last year that I learned that in the original Roe versus Wade Supreme Court decision, they had a clause in there that this decision that was made was based on the fact that there was no conclusive proof of when life started in the womb. And it says that if you could prove that life starts at conception, Roe versus Wade would be void. And so with the science that we now have, they can prove that life does start at conception. And if these things get there, and if we draw on our science knowledge that we have now, there is a real possibility that we could see the end to abortion and the murder of these millions and millions of children.
Yeah.
Man, that's awesome. And this has repercussions. This is kind of a separate issue, but they talk about Social Security and how that it's in trouble and stuff. And a lot of it is because we've aborted 60 to 70 million people in this nation that now would be paying into the system. The whole dynamics of this nation would be totally different if it wasn't for abortion killing all of these unwanted children. So, man, there's some great things happening.
Well, one thing that people need to realize, too, is this is literally genocide in the black community.
Absolutely.
That 60 million babies that we've killed since Roe versus Wade, a disproportionate percentage of those are black babies. And if you go back to Margaret Sanger's original intent, it was to euthanize the black community. I mean, it was to kill black babies. And that's a word that you just don't hear people talking about.
I just put out a thing, and I had these quotes in there, and I don't have them in front of me, so I can't say it as authoritatively as I did. But Margaret Sanger specifically started Planned Parenthood, it had a different name at that time, to stop the black population, and she compared the Negroes to gorillas She quoted the German guy, I forgot his name now, but it was under Hitler, and quoted, and I think it was actually a quotation from Darwin that says that we institutionalize our defective people, whereas in nature they kill off all of these. And they were, Margaret Sanger and all of them were saying it was our duty to eliminate the blacks. And as you said, General, the Planned Parenthood has devastated the black community, and we're paying, what was it, $400 and something million were approved in this last budget that was rammed through, and at the last moment, $450 million for Planned Parenthood. And I was just talking with another leader in this, and they say that they perform all of these other services, but you know what they do? They list that they take blood pressure. They take your heart rate, and all of those things are associated with abortion. They do virtually nothing. I mean, as a percentage of the services that Planned Parenthood does, it is well over 95% of it is all abortion. It's a smokescreen, and the taxpayers are paying for it, and that's absolutely wrong.
Absolutely
wrong. All right, so we've got about 24 minutes or so left. Do we have any questions for the General here?
We've got some questions. General Boykin, somebody wants to know, do you see Saudi Arabia's recent increased friendliness toward the U.S. and Israel as sincere and lasting, or is it more of a temporary, calculated move to counter what Iran is doing?
Yeah. Let's go back to when Donald Trump stood in Riyadh and told like 57 Muslim leaders there, drive them out. Drive them out. Now, that's a Quranic term that's used 17 times in the Quran, drive them out. It's what they did when they captured the southern littorals of Europe and the northern littorals of Africa. They drove the infidels out. And Trump said to them, drive them out. It was the next week Saudi Arabia and at least one other country, but with Saudi Arabia in the lead, then declared Qatar to be sponsoring terrorism. So they got the message from Donald Trump's speech over there in Riyadh when he talked to them. And by the way, that took a lot of courage too.
Yeah.
Now, they've got a young prince over there right now that he's lopping heads off. I don't mean that literally, but he is firing people. He's moving them to other positions. He's basically running a one-man coup over there. I think that Saudi Arabia is caught between two worlds. I think that they are caught between wanting to stay in power and continue to live off the incredible resources that come from oil production. And at the same time, they want to get into the modern world and be credible beyond their own shores. So I think that it's at this point, the jury is still out, but I do think that Saudi Arabia is headed in the right direction. They're trending in the right direction, but there's a long way to go.
Man, that's encouraging.
It is.
That is. You know, I've got a friend who knows people in the Saudi Arabia government, and I'm not prepared to say everything he says, but he says that there are some major, major things happening there that are not publicly known, and they are in a position where, because of their Muslim population and all of the other Arab nations, they're having to do some things covertly, but it really does verify what you're saying, General, that I think that there are some major changes taking place in Saudi Arabia. That could change the whole makeup of the Middle East.
Yeah.
That's really good.
Andrew, I've got a question for you.
Okay.
This viewer wants to know how can you watch the news and stay positive? I mean, we've been talking about a lot of positive things here, but I know what this viewer is talking about. How do you watch the news and just stay positive as Christians? You know,
I'm not sure that you can. I'm not sure that you can have a steady diet of it and be positive, because it is so negative. You know, I went to the U.S. Capitol a number of years ago, and I try and stay positive. I mean, I make an effort to do it. And I went to the Capitol, and I was with David Barton, and we had legislators that came and spoke to us. And when we got through with all of that, I went up to David Barton and I said, you know, I have intentionally tried to be positive, and yet I just realized that I have been negative much more than I should have been, that there's some great things happening that I wasn't even knowing about. And David said to me, he says, you've been watching the 10 Spies Network. And that one phrase said it all. That I think that if all you do is listen to the 10 Spies Network, you are going to be affected by it. And so it's things like this Truth and Liberty broadcast. And again, our website, if you go to truthandliberty.net, we've got so many positive articles there. We've got one about what Trump has accomplished in the first year. We've got another article that is about, it's just about 1 year ago that he made this proclamation that he was going to help faith-based things and end this religious persecution. And it's got all of the things listed that have happened, how that has positively affected us. And so you need sites like this, and of course there's other places. But if all you do is listen to the bad news, you are going to be affected by it. So you need to stick your nose in the Word, but then God is raising up things just like Truth and Liberty. And General Boykin, I've heard you speak a number of times. Of course, you've spoken here at our school, and I've held a conference with you, Breaking the Silence, at Pastor Mark Cowart's church. And I tell you, it's exciting to listen to you and to get these behind-the-scene comments and stuff. So you're going to have to listen to some alternative news if you really want to be positive.
That is a very good point, Andrew. Look, I've quit doing anything but Fox, and even Fox is, they've got their issues as well, but I've stopped doing the other networks except CBN and One America News, and some of those that I know are reporting accurately what's going on. I can't watch the others at all. But we're called to be informed, not necessarily pleased with what we hear, but we're called to be informed because we can't take action, we can't do anything, we don't know how to pray against what's happening if we're not informed, if we're not aware of it. But I will say this, there are so many good alternatives to the mainstream media now that people that are working hard to get the truth out. And you talked about that heartbeat bill in Iowa. Man, you're not going to see that on the mainstream media. You're not going to hear that. You're not going to hear about the surplus. You've got to dig into alternate sources of media. And I would be happy to work with somebody there with you. In fact, when I was out there last year, I think I actually left them with a list of some of the alternate media that they can get things from. And most of it's online. But you got to go beyond just sitting on the couch and watching Fox News or CNN and really dig in with your computer and get these alternate sources that are far more credible than what you hear on these biased mainstream media outlets.
And let me mention that you are the executive vice president of the Family Research Council, which of course is one of the outlets that God is raising up to get out some good news. And how do they get that? FFRC.com?
FFRC.org.
.org. And there's some great material there. And this is one of the things we're wanting to do at the Truth and Liberty Coalition is not necessarily to reinvent everything ourselves, but we're putting links. And General Boykin, if we could have a link to the things that you're doing with the Freedom Research Council, and if we can help direct people towards this positive news, I think that's one of the main things we're wanting to accomplish.
I'll make it a point to send some alternate media sources to you, and you can share those if you want to.
Let me also just touch on one other thing that we talked about prior to this broadcast real briefly. But some of our primary elections during this off year and stuff, it's looking very positive that the Republicans stand to maybe gain even more than what they thought. And I just want to reinforce to the people watching that it was critical that we got Donald Trump elected. I shudder to think what would have happened if Hillary Clinton would have been president. I'm not sure that I had enough faith to believe that America could come back from that one. But as important as that was, these midterm elections are actually more important because the Democrats, the liberals, are so incensed that they are turning out in record numbers. And I guarantee you, if we lose any seats in the Senate, And in the House, we are in danger of them impeaching Trump, and any good thing that's happened could be totally undone. So this is critical, these election years. We want to turn people out to vote.
People have to go vote. It's, first of all, I think it's a responsibility as an American, but I also think that it's your responsibility as a Christian to get engaged in what's going on in this country. And that's how you do it. You do it at the polls. I think that the Republicans will keep the Senate and probably increase. The House, that is really up for grabs right now. And let me just say this, and I'm saying this very seriously. If the Republicans lose the House, they will impeach Donald Trump.
That's terrible.
Now, that doesn't mean that he'll be removed, because the Senate would have to remove him, but they will impeach him. And all you have to do is go back and look at what Nancy Pelosi has said, what Cory Booker has said, what this very off-the-wall woman out in California, what's her name, Maxine Waters,
Yep.
what she has said, and others. They are very serious about impeaching him. Now, I think that they're hurting themselves by hammering this drum, but they will. They've already offered articles of impeachment.
Yeah.
So that's why it's important to keep the House.
And let me say that when we had Congressman McEwen on our program, he brought out something that I wasn't aware of. And I mean, I knew this, but I hadn't connected the dots. But all legislation has to originate in the House of Representatives, and then it goes to the Senate for approval. And the Senate, with this narrow margin, and then some of the Republicans have not been standing with Trump. Because of it, they have just delayed everything. And I forget the exact number, but it's over 400 and something pieces of legislation that would change this nation, that would be positive. And the Senate is just delaying. And once the session is over, all of those bills die, and they will have to be originated again. And if we lose the House, as you were talking about, General, well, then those things will never come up again. And it's just terrible what's happening in the Senate. And we've got to increase the margin there and retain the House. Or, like you said, I believe that we could lose everything that we've gained in the last 18 months.
Yeah, here's another issue, though, and we'll get back to questions. But I was very, very pleased to see that today the Senate bypassed this blue slip bill to allow for a judicial appointment. Your viewers have to understand how important these circuit courts are. It's not just the Supreme Court. He did a good job with Neil Gorsuch, and he'll get another one probably maybe by this fall, because there's strong rumors Kennedy's going to step down. But that said, these circuit courts are where things are appealed before they go to the Supreme Court. And that's why it's so critical. Obama put in 305 circuit court judges. Trump's got right now about 120 that are awaiting a confirmation hearing. This is another reason that we've got to, as citizens, we've got to put pressure on the Senate to get moving and get these nominations through and cut all the nonsense out, like this blue slip thing, which is ill-conceived from the beginning. Bypass that and get these people before the Judicial Committee and get them confirmed into these district courts or circuit courts. And we're going to see a change in things, because the circuit court is the one that says, for example, Obama's immigration policy is unconstitutional. Obama's ban on transgenders in the military is unconstitutional. Mm-hmm. Well, we've got to change that. You change that by getting conservatives on those circuit courts.
In general, I can just imagine how you must feel putting your life on the line, putting your people that are under you, their life on the line when you were in the Army, to guarantee these rights, and then people back here don't even exercise their right to vote. Man, that's disheartening.
It really is.
I mean, that is one of the things that makes our nation different than so many nations, and even in a good year, a 50% turnout would be exceptional. And these midterm elections, actually, we have an opportunity with a relatively small number of people to make a big difference if we turn out, because typically there is a lower turnout in these off-year elections. Have we got any more questions?
Yes,
Paul?
sir. We have a viewer from Houston, Irina, And General Boykin, she wants to know if President Trump is able to make an agreement with Kim Jong Un to denuclearize, how can we verify that they've actually done it and that he's not just hiding what he's done?
Well, to begin with, we have to rely very heavily upon our intelligence community to tell us what he has and where it is. And they have spent a lot of time and resources trying to know that. Now, they won't know it all. But the second part of it is we need to literally, as John Bolton has said, we need to know what day they want our ships in the harbor so we can pick up their nuclear program and haul it off. And I think he's absolutely right. But if he thinks that he's going to pull a fast one on Trump and the Trump administration, I think he's underestimating this guy. There's absolutely no 100% guarantees, but I think we'll get the bulk of it. If he does agree to turn it over, I think we'll get the bulk of it.
Man, that's great. That's encouraging. You talk about good news. This is some good news we're sharing tonight.
Now, there's one question here that we probably need to help correct this. This viewer wants us to explain why the U.S. owes the Palestinians money, and I think we need to address that. The U.S. doesn't owe the Palestinians money. We do give them aid, but we don't owe them any money. I've heard this was the reason Obama sent $150 billion to the Middle East in his last days of his presidency. He said it was their own money. That $150 billion was sent to Iran, and most of that was frozen assets that were in the United States that he released back to Iran. He did, I forget the number now, General Boykin, it was $400 million or $500 million in cash that we loaded on an airplane and took over there at that time. So that's what we're referring to here.
Wouldn't that be considered a bribe?
That sounds like it.
Man, I don't understand how our government gets away with this stuff. If I did that, I'd be in big trouble.
Now, but for clarity, we do need to understand that under the Obama administration, he poured a lot of money into the Gaza Strip and Samaria, or the West Bank. He poured a lot of money in there, and he relocated a lot of those people right here to the United States. So we don't owe them anything. We, as a humanitarian issue, we do try to take care of their humanitarian needs, and we should. It's a moral issue. You know, we should be taking care of them. And all the ministries that I work with personally in Israel are meeting the needs of both Jews and Muslims in that part of the world, and we should do that. But America, the last thing America needs to do is be sending them a bunch of money that's going right into the pockets of those corrupt leaders over there, and those are the same leaders that convince them to train their children from the time they're old enough to understand the language, that their greatest honor they could have in their lives is to go blow themselves up and kill infidels to please Allah. And you see that. Look on YouTube. You'll see it on YouTube. They're training their children to blow themselves up. And that's a sick, diabolical society that would do that.
Well, General Boykin, let me ask you we're just about out of time here, but since you've served from George W. Bush all the way up, for many of these presidents and stuff, you've talked about that you are excited about what's happening. What's your feeling? How does this feel contrasted to when you were in the government and doing all of these things? Is it the same as before, or is it better? Are we moving in a good direction? What's your feel about what's happening?
To be very honest with you, the 8 years prior to Donald Trump were very hard years for me emotionally and even spiritually, to see what was happening to the country and also to the military. And the military was used basically as lab rats. They were used for social experiments, and it just devastated our military. And remember, Andrew, you're a veteran. Our military only has one responsibility, and that's to win wars. That's what Douglas MacArthur told them in 1963 when he stood there in West Point in the dining facility and gave his famous speech about the long gray line. And he said to the cadets there, he said, your mission remains fixed, constant, inviolable. It is to win the nation's wars. Well, nobody has a constitutional right to serve in our military. It's a privilege to be able to serve. Mm-hmm. and some people can't serve. As long as we've had a military, there's always been certain restrictions that some people can't serve. But what the Obama administration tried to do was convince America that it was an issue of fairness that everybody ought to be able to serve. And that is how he then repealed Don't Ask, Don't Tell. That's how he made the decision to put transgenders in the military. He made a decision to let women serve in the infantry and special operations. None of those decisions contributed to readiness. Now we've got a commander-in-chief that respects our military. And there's a picture that just came out today of him in Arlington hugging a little boy that had lost his father. And that's our president today. He cares. He really does care. And our military's morale is back up. There's still a lot that has to be done. But our military's morale is back up. And quite frankly, I think the morale all across this country is up, except for those that are absolutely so far to the left, so far over the Marxist line that they are not ever going to accept anything that he does as being right or good for the country.
This is going to have to be the last question. We're just about out of time, but let me ask you about our preparedness, military preparedness during the last 8 years compared to now. Where do you think we are? What's happening?
It was reduced greatly, Andrew, not only budget cuts, program budget cuts, but sequestration, but then more importantly, the amount of time that we wasted on these social experiments that should have been used preparing for war. And all I would say is this very quickly. If you go back and look at Jeremiah Denton, who was a POW when you were in Vietnam, and he finally, after being tortured for 6 months, he came on camera to do a propaganda film, and he said, "I still support my country's my country's policies." But he blinked torture, and they gave him the Navy Cross for that. It was a very courageous act. And then you look at January of 2016, when 2 patrol boats were taken off the coast of Iran by the Iranians. And by the way, they were in territory. They weren't in Iranian waters, I don't believe, for a minute. But within 3 hours, the commander, a Naval Academy graduate, looked in the camera and said, "This is all our fault, and we want to apologize to the Iranians." And then he said, "And we want to thank them for their hospitality." You tell me what happened. What happened was that commander wasted all of his training time doing these social experiments, sitting in a classroom with every one of his people, because his performance appraisal depended on him having 100% participation. They didn't do code of conduct. They didn't teach them what they have to do if they're taken hostage or prisoner. They spent their time talking about diversity and sexual harassment and inclusion and those kinds of things, and that's not preparing us for war.
Well, General, let me say that I sure appreciate you, and I appreciate your service, man. I appreciate people like you being on our side. It is encouraging to see what's happening now. Thank you very much for being with us tonight. And again, we want to encourage all of our people. You can go to FRC.org. Is that correct?
That's correct.
FRC.org, and General Boykin is the Executive Vice President of the Freedom Research Council. There's a lot of materials there. Again, we've got materials here. We would love for you to go on our website and check it out. We are just trying to put forth, the truth from a Christian perspective and give a spin on things that I believe is a correct spin, representing what's happening today. And hopefully this has encouraged you today. So thank you for being with us. Thanks, Paul, for doing this. And General, again, God bless you and God bless America.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Join us next time for the Truth and Liberty broadcast. Find tonight's episode and related articles and links at truthandliberty.net.